Rain had been pouring relentlessly over the city of Chicago for 3 straight days, turning the streets into mirrors reflecting the dull, flickering neon signs of diners and motels. Inside his yellow cab, Jack Turner gripped the steering wheel with a mix of boredom and mild irritation. It was past midnight, the hours when the city's soul felt most exposed, raw, and dangerous. He had seen every shade of desperation, greed, and madness that the urban sprawl could offer, but tonight, something felt different. His passenger, a man who never spoke a word, never reached for the meter, and never exited the cab at his supposed destination, had become a ghost in his routine. Every night for the past month, the man had appeared without fail at the same street corner, dressed in a dark overcoat that seemed almost vintage, his face hidden under the brim of a hat. The passenger's presence was uncanny, unsettling even. Jack tried to imagine what it would be like if he simply vanished into the rain one night, but the thought quickly slipped away, suppressed by the hum of the engine and the rhythmic splash of tires through puddles. Where to tonight? Jack had started asking, though he never expected an answer. The passenger never replied. The city lights reflected off his impassive face, and for some reason, Jack had begun to sense that he was carrying more than just a silent man. He carried secrets, and secrets, in Chicago, often bled into danger. Tonight, Jack's instincts prickled. The passenger had directed him with subtle gestures, a tilt of the head, a pointed finger through the rain-streaked window. They passed the familiar streets, then diverged into alleyways Jack had never dared to explore. The air seemed to thicken, the mist curling around street lamps like fingers. As they drove deeper into unknown territory, Jack's cab radio crackled, momentarily spitting out fragments of old crime reports. Names he didn't recognize, dates that seemed oddly familiar. The passenger's gaze, when Jack dared to glance at it, seemed to pierce through him. There was something alive, almost predatory, behind the stillness of his eyes. Jack's grip tightened, and for the first time, the routine of his job felt like a trap. Suddenly, a figure darted across the street, illuminated by the headlights. The cab screeched to a halt. The passenger didn't flinch, didn't move. Jack's heart raced. The figure vanished into the shadows before he could make sense of it. Later, as they reached a forgotten district near the river, the passenger finally leaned forward slightly, pointing toward an abandoned warehouse. Jack's pulse quickened. The place reeked of decay and neglect, walls sprayed with decades of graffiti, shattered glass crunching underfoot. Something told Jack he shouldn't go there. Something told him that the silent passenger had led him here intentionally. And yet, against every instinct, he obeyed. Inside the warehouse, the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, moving with a life of their own. Jack thought he heard whispers, but when he turned, there was nothing, just the empty echoes of dripping water and wind. And then, faintly in the far corner, he saw it, a wall covered with newspaper clippings and photographs dating back years. Faces of missing people stared back at him, eyes frozen in fear. And there, among the chaos, was a picture that made his blood run cold. The passenger, or at least someone indistinguishably like him, standing at the center of another crime scene decades ago. Jack froze. The man in his cab, this unassuming silent rider, was not just a passenger. He was a thread weaving through a tapestry of unsolved crimes, a specter of the city's dark past. And as the rain continued its relentless drum outside, Jack realized he had stepped into a story far bigger, far darker than he had ever imagined. Jack's hands trembled slightly as he drove away from the warehouse. The image of the wall of clippings etched into his mind. Every streetlight he'd passed seemed to flicker in warning, every pedestrian a shadowed specter in the rain-slicked streets. His cab, once a vessel of routine and monotony, now felt like a confessional booth where secrets whispered from the leather seats. The passenger remained as silent as ever, his gaze fixed on the window, watching the city as if it were a chessboard, and he was a grandmaster plotting the next move. Jack stole glances in the rearview mirror, noting the impossibly calm demeanor of a man who had just guided him through the remnants of forgotten crimes. It didn't make sense. This man had no reason to trust him, yet he had. And that, Jack realized, was the terrifying part. Turning onto a quieter avenue, Jack noticed something strange, a series of identical taxis following him at a distance. The way they maintained pace, never overtaking, never making erratic turns, made his blood run cold. At first, he thought it was coincidence, a reflection of the city's late-night rhythm. But the pattern persisted. 3, 4, 5 cabs trailing him through empty streets. "Maybe I'm seeing things," he muttered, voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. The passenger didn't respond. He never did, but Jack felt the weight of unseen understanding from the silent figure. This was no ordinary man. He had orchestrated something far bigger than a routine cab ride. And the more Jack tried to rationalize it, the deeper the grip of unease tightened. Suddenly, the cab radio crackled again, static cutting through the monotony before a fragment of a report came through. "Suspect unidentified, connected to at least 4 unsolved cases. Chicago Police Department requests caution." Jack's stomach churned. The voice was familiar. He had heard it before, on some late-night news broadcast, but the timing, coinciding with the presence of his passenger, was too precise to be coincidence. He glanced at the rearview mirror again. The other taxis had disappeared. One moment they were shadows on the horizon, the next nothing but mist. Trying to shake off the growing paranoia, Jack maneuvered through a tunnel. The concrete walls pressed in, the echoes of the tires like a heartbeat in a confined chest. That's when it happened. The passenger finally spoke, a voice low, almost a whisper, yet carrying authority and danger. "You shouldn't have seen that," he said. Jack's heart leapt. The man's lips barely moved, but the words were clear, chilling. A surge of adrenaline pushed him to the edge of panic. Who are you?" Jack demanded. His voice cracked under the weight of fear and disbelief. The passenger's eyes met his in the mirror, sharp and unyielding. "I am a shadow," he replied cryptically, "and shadows leave marks that refuse to fade." Before Jack could respond, the cab jolted violently. The rear tires skidded over an unseen patch of oil, sending the vehicle careening toward the tunnel wall. Heart pounding, Jack wrestled with the steering wheel, barely managing to keep the cab on course. When the vehicle finally steadied, he looked back at the passenger. The man was still perfectly calm, seated, as though the near crash had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. By the time they emerged from the tunnel, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening like shards of broken glass. Jack's thoughts raced. Every instinct screamed to abandon the cab, to run, but the passenger's presence anchored him, demanding obedience. Somewhere in the labyrinth of Chicago, Jack realized, there was a story unraveling, and he had become an unwilling witness to it, its unfolding horrors. When they reached the passenger's usual stop, the man did something unusual. He stepped out. Finally, a motion, a human action, but without a word, without explanation. Jack watched him disappear into the foggy night, leaving nothing but the echo of wet footsteps, and then he noticed a single, folded envelope on the passenger seat, addressed to him. Jack's hand shook as he reached for it. Inside were photographs of crime scenes, unsolved murders, and one image that made his blood run cold: his own cab, parked outside his apartment, captured from some unseen vantage point. Somewhere in Chicago, the shadow was watching him. And now Jack understood. The game had only just begun. Jack Turner couldn't sleep. Every creak of his apartment, the radiator's hiss, the distant hum of traffic, even the soft tap of rain against the window felt amplified, like the city itself was whispering warnings. The envelope the passenger had left on his seat now sat on the kitchen table. Photographs, splayed out like a grim collage of Chicago's darkest secrets. Faces of the missing, crime scenes long cold, and then the image of his own cab outside his apartment captured from an unknown vantage point. He studied each photograph meticulously. A pattern emerged, a sequence of dates, times, and locations. connecting seemingly random murders over the past 2 decades. And at the center of it all, almost like a signature, was a shadowy figure always just out of focus, always watching. The resemblance to his silent passenger was unmistakable. Jack's mind raced. The cab had always been his sanctuary, the one place where he controlled the narrative. But now it felt violated, infiltrated by a force he couldn't name, a man who existed in the margins of law and morality. With each photograph, Jack felt the invisible threads of a hidden world tightening around him. By morning, he had made a decision. He had to follow the trail. The passenger might be gone, but his influence remained. Jack began revisiting the locations in the photographs, retracing steps that seemed like breadcrumbs left intentionally for him. He started with the warehouse, now abandoned and silent, though the air still reeked faintly of old dampness and decay. Nothing moved except for a rat scuttling across the floor, its eyes reflecting the dim light like tiny mirrors. Then Jack noticed a subtle detail he had missed before. Etched into the concrete wall, almost imperceptibly, was a series of numbers. 071214. Dates? Coordinates? He couldn't tell, but instinct told him it was a clue. His pulse quickened. Whoever this passenger was, he wasn't just silent, he was meticulous, calculated, and, most terrifyingly, always one step ahead. That night, as Jack returned to his cab, he felt the eyes again. Not from the street, not from the darkened alleyways, but from the very air around him. And then he saw a figure dart past the corner of his eye, impossibly fast, vanishing before he could process it. Panic surged. Jack locked the doors, heart pounding, hands sweaty on the steering wheel. The cab radio crackled once more, faint and distorted, as if someone or something was communicating through the static. Words emerged, fragmented and chilling. Trust no one. Follow the trail. Shadows, remember. Jack's mind reeled. Was this the passenger, or someone else entirely? The line between reality and paranoia blurred. Every honk, every footstep outside, felt like an intrusion. He realized he was no longer merely a taxi driver. He had become a participant in a game whose rules he didn't understand. Determined, Jack began digging into old police reports, using the dates from the warehouse wall as starting points. Each case was cold, long forgotten, yet linked by eerie coincidences. Every victim had been seen by a taxi driver on the night they disappeared. Every witness reported a man in a dark overcoat, silent, observing. And always, the trail went cold at some abandoned location, like a trail vanishing into thin air. Hours turned into days. Jack barely slept, surviving on caffeine and sheer resolve. He began noticing other anomalies. Street cameras turned away just as he passed. Strangers who seemed to appear and disappear around him. And messages scrawled in unexpected places on lampposts, on the back of receipts, warnings in handwriting he didn't recognize, but eerily familiar in tone. The final piece fell into place when he revisited a neglected precinct building downtown. Dust choked the air, and yellowed case files littered the floor. Among them, a single file stood out, a cold case from 23 years ago, featuring the exact same pattern of disappearances. The suspect description, remarkably, matched the passenger, but the case had been closed due to lack of evidence. Jack realized the horrifying truth. The passenger was not just a figure of the present. He was part of a legacy of crime, a shadow weaving through decades, leaving a trail of fear and mystery. And now, by some cruel twist of fate, Jack had become entangled in the narrative, upon whose next move could mean life or death. As he left the precinct, a newspaper blowing across the sidewalk caught his eye. The headline read, "Unsolved Murders Plague Chicago. Are We Being Watched?" And beneath it, a photograph of a dark figure had pulled low, coat button tightly, standing beside a yellow cab. Jack's stomach turned. He wasn't just following the trail. The trail had already found him. The streets of Chicago had never felt more hostile. Fog rolled over the pavement like creeping smoke, hiding every corner and alley in ambiguity. Jack Turner gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened, his eyes darting between reflections in puddles and the fleeting shapes of pedestrians moving through the mist. Every shadow seemed to conceal an invisible observer. Every passing siren sounded like a warning. It had been 3 days since the warehouse, 3 days since the envelope, and Jack's mind was fraying under the relentless weight of unseen eyes. He knew he had to act, or else he would be consumed by fear before he could even understand what he was up against. So tonight, he made a choice. He would follow the trail wherever it led, no matter how dangerous. The first lead was an old, forgotten district near the river, streets narrow and flanked by shuttered warehouses. Jack's cab hummed softly, a small comfort amid the oppressive silence. He had memorized the numbers etched into the warehouse wall: 071214, and believed they were coordinates, or a date leading to the next clue. As he drove, he noticed movement at the edge of his vision. A figure, just standing there watching. Jack froze, gripping the wheel tighter. The man was impossible to make out in the dim fog, but his stance, the tilt of his hat, the overcoat it was in. The passenger. "Why are you following me?" Jack shouted into the darkness, voice trembling. His words seemed swallowed by the fog, yet somehow he knew the man had heard him. No answer. Only a slight movement, a nod almost imperceptible. A challenge unspoken. Jack's pulse quickened. He drove closer, trying to get a better view. And then the figure moved suddenly, stepping into the street. The headlights revealed nothing but the silhouette, yet Jack felt the presence pressing against him. A force of sheer intent. Before he could react, the figure disappeared. Jack slammed on the brakes, spinning the cab to a halt. He leapt out, heart pounding, scanning the fog. Nothing, only the sound of his own ragged breathing and the distant echo of footsteps. Jack's instincts screamed to run, yet he forced himself to follow. He moved cautiously, each step measured, aware that the mist could conceal anything, friend or foe, trap or revelation. Then he found it, a narrow alleyway, walls covered in peeling paint, and graffiti illuminated by a single flickering lamp. And there, scrawled in hurried letters on the brick wall, were words that made his stomach drop. "You are next." Panic surged, but Jack's determination overrode fear. Whoever this passenger was, he had a method, a pattern, and Jack would uncover it or die trying. He pressed further into the alley, and that's when he saw something impossible. A series of symbols etched into the ground, barely visible, forming a path deeper into the darkness. He followed them. The alley opened into a courtyard, desolate, drenched in fog. At the far end, the passenger finally appeared, fully illuminated in a flicker of lamplight. His presence was commanding, almost otherworldly. Jack could see his eyes now sharp, calculating and yielding. "Why are you doing this?" Jack demanded. His voice wavered, caught between anger and terror. The man tilted his head, the shadow of his head hiding most of his face. "Do you want to know, or are you afraid of the answer?" Jack's throat went dry. I want to know." The passenger took a slow step forward, and the fog seemed to bend around him, swallowing the light. "Because the city forgets its sins," he said softly, each word deliberate, "and someone must remind it." Before Jack could respond, the ground beneath his feet seemed to shift, the alley suddenly feeling narrower, constricting, like the walls themselves were alive. A sudden gust of wind knocked him off balance, and when he looked up, the passenger was gone, vanished. No footsteps, no shadow, just the lingering chill of an unseen presence. Jack staggered back to his cab, mind reeling. The encounter had changed everything. The passenger wasn't just a ghost of the city's crimes, he was a predator, patient and meticulous, and Jack had unknowingly entered the hunt. As he drove away, a chilling thought gripped him. This wasn't random. Every step he had taken, every clue he had followed, had been designed to lead him here. And if he wanted answers, if he wanted to survive, he would have to anticipate the moves of a man who seemed almost invisible. The night swallowed him, the city's fog wrapping around his cab like a shroud, and Jack realized with stark clarity that nothing in his life would ever feel safe again. The next morning, Chicago awoke to a thin drizzle. turning the streets into slick mirrors reflecting neon signs and the occasional hurried pedestrian. Jack Turner, blurry-eyed and exhausted, sat in his cab outside the precinct, a growing sense of urgency knotting his stomach. Sleep had evaded him. The images from the alley, the words scrawled on the brick, the symbols etched into the ground haunted every blink. But he knew he couldn't wait any longer. The silent passenger wasn't just a threat. He was a key, a puzzle, a dark guide through the city's forgotten crimes. Jack entered the precinct with the envelope clutched under his arm. The police had long dismissed the cold cases he now obsessed over, filing them away as anomalies or failures. But Jack had something the officers lacked: direct evidence, a trail of breadcrumbs placed by the passenger himself. He pushed past the clerks, demanding access to archives, and soon found himself buried in decades-old case files. The pattern was undeniable. Each missing person had been last seen near a taxi, often hailed for a ride they never truly took. Witnesses described a man in a dark overcoat, his demeanor silent, unnerving, almost hypnotic. Jack cross-referenced dates with the numbers he'd found in the warehouse, and the coincidences became too precise to ignore. The passenger wasn't merely a recurring figure, he was a constant, threading through 20-30 years of unresolved crime. Jack's mind raced. How could one man or something resembling a man remain active across decades? Some cases dated back before he himself had been born. And yet, the photos, the witness testimonies, and now his own encounters pointed to one undeniable fact. The passenger's reach was enduring, methodical, and lethal. Hours passed. Jack dug deeper, uncovering hidden reports, old surveillance tapes, and photographs yellowed by age. Each discovery painted a picture of a predator who thrived in shadows, leaving chaos in his wake. Some reports hinted at subtle manipulations: doors left unlocked, surveillance cameras disabled, clues planted to mislead investigators. It was as if the city itself conspired to hide him. Then Jack stumbled upon something unexpected. Among the files, a personal note, typed and unsigned, referencing a murder 30 years ago. The language was eerily formal, precise, almost clinical, but it hinted at an accomplice, or at least someone who observed and recorded the passenger's actions. The note ended abruptly. He watches, he waits, he chooses. Beware the cab that carries him. Jack's blood ran cold. He realized the silent passenger had not only been active for decades but had also cultivated witnesses, pawns, chroniclers, perhaps even worshippers, ensuring that his legend, his control, remained intact. And now Jack had unwittingly become a part of that story. Determined to understand, Jack decided to return to the streets, retracing the passenger's paths. He drove past the warehouse district, along fog-filled alleyways, and finally to the riverfront. There, in a forgotten lot by the water, he found another clue: a makeshift memorial of sorts, candles, and photographs arranged with deliberate care. Faces of the missing, faded yet recognizable, stared up at him. One photograph caught his attention. It was of a woman in her 20s, the same face Jack had glimpsed in the newspaper from years ago. Beneath it, a date scribbled hastily, 071214, the same as the warehouse etching. As Jack reached up to touch the photograph, a voice whispered from behind him, low and calm, "You see too much, yet not enough." He spun around. The passenger stood there, shadowed by the mist, hat low over his eyes. The man's presence radiated control, precision, and menace all at once. Jack's heart pounded. "Why me?" he demanded. "Why choose me?" The passenger's smile was faint, almost imperceptible. "Because you noticed. Others merely watched." He stepped closer, and Jack felt the air shift, charged with an unspoken threat. And now the game begins. The fog thickened, swallowing both the lot and the city behind them. Jack realized then that the passenger's influence wasn't confined to crimes. It extended to the very atmosphere of the city, to every shadow, every corner, every heartbeat that felt too quick in the night. As the man vanished once more into the mist, Jack knew that what he had uncovered was only the beginning. The threads of the past were tangled, complex and lethal, and to follow them meant risking everything: life, sanity, and perhaps even the truth itself. The rain returned that evening, soft at first, then relentless, hammering against the windshield of Jack Turner's cab as he navigated the city's maze of streets. His mind had been a storm all day, circling over the archive findings, the photographs, and the chilling encounter at the riverfront. Every instinct screamed that he was being watched. Every shadow seemed alive, moving with intention. Jack parked near the old industrial district, a place where decades of crime had been buried under layers of neglect. He carried a new set of photographs, each depicting crime scenes tied to the passenger over the years. Faces frozen in fear, bodies arranged with eerie care, each image a whisper from the past. As he walked toward the river again, he noticed an odd pattern: discarded newspapers from the 1980s, seemingly scattered in the alleyways. They were too deliberate to be random. A sudden movement caught his eye. A man in a gray overcoat, his face obscured by shadows, stepped from behind a dumpster. Jack froze. The figure was familiar, not the passenger, but someone connected. A witness. An accomplice. The man spoke softly, almost too softly for Jack to hear over the rain. "You shouldn't dig this deep," he said. "Some doors are meant to stay closed." Jack's pulse surged. "Who said you?" he demanded. The figure shook his head, disappearing back into the fog before Jack could respond. He was alone again, but the warning burned in his ears. He realized that the passenger's influence extended beyond a single man. He had allies, perhaps shadows of his own making, ensuring the trail remained deadly. Jack continued down the pier. The wooden boards slipped beneath his shoes. Then he saw it, a faint reflection in the water. A figure, standing on the edge of the dock, perfectly still, had low overcoat, dark eyes fixed on him. The passenger. No words were spoken. The air felt charged, as if electricity hummed between them. Jack wanted to run, but something rooted him to the spot, an obsession he couldn't ignore. The passenger stepped closer, and Jack noticed a subtle detail he hadn't seen before: a series of scratches on the passenger's coat sleeve, almost imperceptible, yet patterned like tally marks. Each mark was a date, dates of unsolved murders. Jack's stomach churned. The passenger was a living ledger of death, marking each life he had touched or extinguished. "You see them," the passenger whispered, voice low and deliberate. "Every mistake, every forgotten soul, all part of the record." Jack's mind raced. How could a single person orchestrate decades of terror, remain unseen, and yet leave cryptic trails for someone to follow? Was this some supernatural predator, or a human with unparalleled cunning? The answer seemed irrelevant. The danger was immediate, palpable. Suddenly, the passenger vanished again, leaving Jack staring into the misty darkness of the river. A faint sound of movement upstream drew him toward an abandoned boathouse. Inside, scattered papers and photographs created a chaotic map of the city's crimes, each thread connecting the past to the present. Among them, a single photograph made Jack's blood run cold. A picture of his own apartment building, taken from above. Someone was watching him. Always. Jack realized then that he was no longer investigating the passenger. He had become part of the experiment, a piece in the intricate web of terror. And if he wanted to survive, he would have to anticipate the moves of a predator who had mastered invisibility, patience, and fear. As he left the boathouse, the city seemed transformed. Every street corner, every alley, every flickering street lamp became a potential stage for the passenger's next act. The fog enveloped the skyline, swallowing familiar landmarks, leaving only uncertainty. Jack knew with unshakable clarity: the closer he came to the truth, the more dangerous the pursuit would become. Tonight, he vowed, he would not merely follow the trail. He would step into the darkness deliberately, tracing the passenger's path, uncovering the connections that had remained hidden for decades. But even as he drove back through the rain-soaked streets, Jack couldn't shake a lingering dread. Some stories, once begun, are never meant to end. The night air was thick with fog, curling around the street lamps like spectral fingers, as Jack Turner drove through the Old South Loop district. His cab tires hissed over rain-slicked pavement, the city's reflections twisting and warping in the windows. Every instinct screamed that he was being followed, and deep down, Jack knew it wasn't paranoia. He had spent the day piecing together the passengers' movements, connecting decades-old crimes with locations he could now trace on a map. The puzzle was growing clearer, but with clarity came danger. Every street he traveled seemed to echo with unseen footsteps. Every alleyway whispered threats in the fog. Then, on a narrow bridge spanning the Chicago River, Jack saw movement in the shadows. Two figures stepped from the mist, blocking his path. One was unmistakably the passenger hat low, overcoat buttoned tightly. The other was someone new, a silent accomplice, moving with the same precision and calm. Jack's heart thundered. He slammed the brakes, skidding dangerously close to the railing. "What do you want from me?" he demanded, voice shaking. The passenger's gaze, cold and unyielding, met his in the rearview mirror. There was no answer, only a faint tilt of the head, as if to say, "Follow the rules or perish." Jack's mind raced. He knew he had to escape. His cab, a familiar vessel, suddenly felt like a cage. The accomplice moved closer, a shadow gliding across the bridge, cutting off his exit. Jack floored the accelerator, swerving sharply to avoid contact. The cab skidded on wet asphalt, tires squealing, the city lights blurring into streaks of neon. He barely managed to make it off the bridge, heart pounding, palms slick with sweat. His breaths came in short, ragged gasps as he navigated a series of narrow streets, trying to lose the shadows that had become a constant presence in his life. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, he pulled into a deserted parking lot. Silence, thick and suffocating, enveloped him. Jack's relief was short-lived. On the passenger seat lay a new envelope, identical to the one from the warehouse. His hand shook as he opened it. Inside were photographs of the bridge, images taken from angles only someone watching him could know. Beneath them, a single message: "You can run, but you cannot hide. Meet me where it began." Jack's mind reeled. Where it began. The warehouse. The thought of returning to that decaying building made his stomach knot, but he knew he had no choice. The passenger was not merely a figure of the past. He was orchestrating events in real time, guiding Jack toward revelations that could cost him his life. As Jack sat in the cab, he began examining the photographs more closely. Hidden in the reflections of the street lights were faint symbols identical to the tally marks on the passenger's coat and the etchings from the alley. Each symbol marked a specific date, a point in time, a life taken. But there was something new here. A mark that had not appeared in any previous case, one that corresponded to a future date tonight. The realization hit him like a thunderclap. The passenger's trail was not just historical, it was predictive. He knew Jack's movements, his decisions, perhaps even his fears. And the envelope wasn't just a clue, it was a summons, a challenge. Jack felt the weight of inevitability pressing down on him. He had entered a game whose rules he could barely understand, a labyrinth of shadows and history. But despite the terror, a spark of determination ignited within him. He would confront the passenger, uncover the truth, and survive. He had no choice. As the rain began to fall again, Jack started the cab, gripping the wheel with renewed purpose. The warehouse awaited the origin of the mystery, the site of secrets long buried. And somewhere in the fog, the passenger waited, silent, patient, almost omnipresent. Jack exhaled slowly, his pulse still racing, and drove toward the warehouse, the city's dark heart stretching out before him. The encounter that awaited would change everything. The warehouse loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, its skeletal frame outlined by the intermittent flicker of a dying street lamp. Jack Turner gripped the steering wheel like a lifeline, his knuckles white, eyes scanning every shadow for movement. Rain-slicked streets reflected the dim light, and the air carried the scent of wet concrete and decay. Tonight, he had no illusions. This was where the mystery had begun, and it was where he would either find the truth or lose himself entirely. As he pushed open the rusted door, a wave of cold air swept past, carrying with it the faint, metallic tang of long-forgotten blood. The interior was cavernous, empty but for the faint evidence of past activity: scattered papers, old furniture tipped over, and walls etched with cryptic symbols Jack had seen before. But tonight, there was something new. At the center of the main floor stood a large table, meticulously organized. On it lay photographs, documents, and a series of handwritten notes, everything pointing to a single, horrifying conclusion. Jack's eyes fell on a photograph that made his blood run cold, a younger version of the passenger, standing alongside his father in a city alley decades ago. Jack's mind raced. This wasn't just a random predator. This was someone entwined with the city's past in ways no one could have imagined. The notes told a story that was impossible to ignore. The passenger had been orchestrating events for decades, but not merely for personal gain. He had been cataloging sins, tracking corruption, and punishing those who slipped through the cracks of law and morality. Every murder, every disappearance, was a calculated act to balance a twisted sense of justice. And now, Jack realized with dawning horror, he was being drawn into this intricate moral ledger. Suddenly, a sound behind him, a soft, deliberate footstep, made him spin. The passenger was there, as silent and commanding as ever, his head shadowing his face. Jack could feel the intensity of the man's gaze even in the dim light. "You've come far," the passenger said softly, almost admiringly. "Few notice the patterns. Fewer survive the pursuit." Jack swallowed hard, his pulse hammering. "Why involve me? Why leave me clues?" The passenger stepped closer, and Jack noticed the tally marks etched on his sleeve, the dates of every life taken. "Because you see too clearly. You understand the city's hidden rhythms. And you might yet make the choices others feared." Jack realized the terrifying truth. This was not a man he could outsmart easily. Every clue, every step, every encounter had been calculated to push him further into the web of observation and judgment. And yet, there was a moment of opportunity here. One misstep by the passenger, and Jack might finally uncover what he had been hiding for decades. He approached the table, trying to piece together the final connections. A photograph of the city skyline revealed rooftops and alleys, each marked with subtle symbols that corresponded to the past crimes. And there, in a corner, was a current photograph of a building, his apartment. Someone was watching him, not as a shadow, but as a presence, ever present and omniscient. The passenger's voice cut through Jack's spiraling thoughts. "You will see it soon enough," he whispered. "All paths lead to the final choice." Before Jack could respond, the man moved again, disappearing into the shadows like smoke. Silence reclaimed the warehouse, leaving Jack alone with the documents, the photographs, and the weight of the revelation. The passenger had meticulously orchestrated everything, and now Jack understood that the final confrontation was inevitable. As he exited into the foggy night, Jack felt a mixture of dread and determination. The city's shadows seemed to shift around him, whispering secrets, guiding him, warning him. The passenger's influence extended everywhere, through time, through space, and now through Jack himself. Tonight, Jack realized, would not merely be a pursuit. It would be a reckoning. And the question that burned in his mind was simple yet terrifying: would he survive the game, or become another ghost in the passenger's ledger? Jack Turner's hand shook as he gripped the wheel of his cab, the city streets slick with rain and the lingering fog from the riverfront. Every instinct screamed that tonight would change everything. The passenger had left no direct instructions, only the cryptic message from the warehouse: all paths lead to the final choice. Jack had spent days piecing together a plan, mapping every location, every symbol, every clue he had collected over weeks of investigation. Tonight, he would confront the man or vanish trying. He parked near a deserted pier, the site where he had first glimpsed the passenger in the shadows weeks ago. The area was silent save for the faint slap of water against the docks. Jack arranged the cab strategically, engine running, headlights off, using the familiar vehicle as bait. He had set up cameras on the surrounding walls, hoping to capture what could only be described as the impossible. The passenger himself. Hours passed. The wind howled across the water, carrying the distant sounds of the city. Jack's nerves frayed, each creak of the pier echoing like a gunshot. Then, movement, a dark figure approaching silently across the boards. The passenger. Hat low, overcoat buttoned, movements precise and deliberate. Jack held his breath. The man stopped just beyond the cab, studying him with an intensity that made Jack's skin crawl. Then, without warning, the accomplice appeared from the shadows behind the passenger, stepping into the dim light. Jack realized with a jolt that this was not a solo predator. He was always 2 steps ahead, with contingencies in place for every move. The air thickened. Jack knew he had only seconds. He activated one of the hidden cameras, the light briefly illuminating the passenger's face. The man's eyes caught it instantly, narrowing with a dangerous curiosity. Then he moved with impossible speed, a blur, bypassing the cab, leaving Jack's makeshift trap momentarily useless. A hand shot out from the shadows, grabbing Jack's shoulder. He spun violently, heart hammering, only to face the accomplice, silent and menacing, blocking his escape. Panic surged, but Jack forced himself to think. He remembered the symbols etched in the alley, the tally marks on the passenger's sleeve, the patterns in the photographs. Everything had been a series of predictable behaviors. Jack feigned surrender, stepping backward slowly. "You don't want to hurt me," he said, voice shaking. The accomplice tilted his head, an almost imperceptible twitch indicating awareness, yet restraint. The passenger stepped closer, eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. Then Jack acted. Using the cab as leverage, he vaulted inside, slamming the door and engaging the engine. Tires screamed on wet planks as he reversed, narrowly avoiding the dock railing. The passenger and the accomplice reacted instantly, but Jack had anticipated their movement. He swerved sharply, navigating the maze of pilings and warehouses, using the fog and shadows as cover. Heart pounding, Jack glanced in the rearview mirror. For a fleeting moment, he saw the passenger standing at the edge of the pier, watching almost admiringly, before vanishing into the mist once more. The accomplice had disappeared as well, leaving Jack alone but not safe. He realized the encounter had been a tested demonstration of skill, patience, and intelligence. Breathing heavily, Jack knew one thing with certainty: he had survived. But the passenger's web was far from fully unraveled. Every move he made from now on would be anticipated, every decision observed. The city itself seemed complicit, every shadow a potential threat, every streetlight hiding a predator's gaze. Yet amidst the terror, a grim determination took root. Jack understood that he could no longer run. The passenger had orchestrated decades of events with surgical precision, and now Jack had to confront him on equal terms. The final confrontation was near, and every clue, every thread he had uncovered pointed to a revelation that would shake him to the core. As the rain finally eased into a steady drizzle, Jack drove toward the warehouse once again, knowing that tomorrow or tonight would reveal the truth behind the mysterious passenger. The warehouse stood silent, a monolith of steel and decay, silhouetted against the dim glow of Chicago's midnight skyline. Jack Turner approached cautiously, rain-soaked and tense, every sense on high alert. This was the place where it all began and where it would end. The envelope, the photographs, the tallies of decades of crime, all had led him here. He knew the passenger was waiting. Inside, the cavernous space was empty at first glance, but the familiar scent of damp wood and rusted metal hinted at recent activity. Jack's eyes adjusted to the darkness, scanning for movement. Then he saw it, a faint figure emerging from the shadows. Hat low, overcoat buttoned, presence commanding as ever. The passenger stepped forward, every movement deliberate, every breath measured. "You've come far," the passenger said, voice calm, almost reverent. "Few follow the patterns. Fewer still survive." Jack's pulse raced. Why all this? Why the murders, the disappearances? What do you want? The passenger's eyes glimmered in the dim light. The city forgets its sins. I remember them. And I balance them. Each life I touch, each soul I mark. It is all part of the ledger. He gestured toward a large wooden table now illuminated by a single dangling bulb. On it lay photographs, documents, and the meticulously kept tally of decades of crime. Jack stepped closer, studying the table. Faces of missing persons, crime scene photos, and dates filled the space in chaotic perfection. Then he saw it, a photograph of his own cab, taken from a rooftop, the same one he had seen before, only now with a faint note in the corner, "You are next if you stray." A cold realization struck him. The passenger's web extended into every corner of the city, every alley, every street, and now into Jack's life. The past, the present, and the future were all his to control or punish. "I'm not just a shadow," the passenger continued. "I am a mirror. I show the city its own darkness. And you see it. That is why you survived the trap." Jack's mind raced. He had followed every clue, anticipated every move, and yet he felt utterly powerless. But he also noticed something new, subtle inconsistencies in the photographs. Slight patterns the passenger hadn't accounted for, tiny gaps in the ledger, moments where predictability faltered. A daring thought seized him. If the passenger had been meticulous for decades, perhaps one error could be exploited. Jack stepped closer to the table, feigning distraction, then abruptly swept the ledger and photographs into a box he had brought. The passenger's eyes flared with shock and then calculation. "Clever," he murmured, his calm facade cracking for the first time. But cleverness is not enough. Jack bolted for the exit, his cab parked nearby, fog curling around the warehouse like living tendrils. The passenger followed, moving within human speed, yet Jack had the advantage now, the ledger, the proof, the key to exposing him. Tires screamed on wet pavement as Jack drove through the misty streets, the passenger's presence never far, always closing in. Finally, Jack reached the riverfront, where surveillance cameras, ones he had rigged earlier, captured the passenger's movements. A plan formed in Jack's mind. Using the city's own network of cameras and witnesses, he could reveal the passenger to the authorities, break the decades-long cycle of fear and invisibility. The passenger's voice came over the wind, calm but tinged with admiration. "You may have survived tonight, but the ledger is eternal. Shadows never die." Jack didn't look back. He pressed forward, adrenaline fueling his every move, guiding him toward exposure, toward justice, and toward finally breaking free of the passenger's meticulously crafted web. As dawn broke over Chicago, rain glistening on the streets, Jack realized something profound. The city still held darkness in every corner, but now one shadow had been forced into the light. And though the passenger might endure in memory, in myth, and in fear, Jack Turner had survived. He had learned, adapted, and ultimately outmaneuvered the silent predator who had haunted the city for decades. The fog lifted, revealing the skyline, tall and indifferent, yet witness to a long brewing reckoning. And somewhere in the maze of streets, Jack knew that the passenger, though unseen, had left his mark. But this time, it was Jack who had turned the tide.